The morning after his funeral, she didn't bring me tea or even say my name. She just stood at the kitchen door, arms crossed, no softness in her face, and said, "Now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags, and never come back." That was it. No hug. No sorry. Not even a whisper of kindness. Just the sound of the fridge humming behind her, the tea kettle still cooling on the stove, and a silence so sharp it could have cut through bone. Let that sit for a moment. I'd been living with Daniel and his wife Brittany for almost 8 years by then. It was never supposed to be permanent, just until my knees got worse and Daniel insisted it was safer for me not to live alone. At first, I was hesitant. I didn't want to intrude, but Daniel made it sound like a kindness, like I was needed, not just tolerated. And when Brittany didn't object outright, I thought, maybe it would be okay. Michael and I had always been simple people. We never needed much. A quiet room, a hot meal, and each other. That was more than enough. Their house was big enough. We had the upstairs bedroom. It overlooked a tree that turned golden in the fall. I used to sit at the window in the early mornings, wrapped in a shawl, watching the leaves flutter down like slow rain. Michael would bring me tea, just the way I liked. Extra weak, no sugar, lots of milk. Most people get it wrong, but he never did. Not once. He'd say, "Tea should calm you, not wake you up." And that was Michael, always gentle, always steady. I tried not to take up space. I really did. I folded my laundry before it cooled, kept my slippers in the corner, never played the TV too loud. If I left the mug in the sink, I'd wash it before anyone noticed. I thought, if I'm careful, they'll never feel crowded. I wasn't a burden, or so I thought. I cooked sometimes. Cleaned more often than not. Watched little Aria when they were busy. I even stopped wearing my rose-scented lotion because Brittany once said it gave her a headache. Brittany never called me mom, just Jessica, always flat, distant. On her good days, she was polite. On her bad days, she was tense, terse, like she was always one inconvenience away from snapping. There were rules in that house. Not written ones, but they were just as strict. Shoes by the door, labels facing out in the fridge. No loud voices before 10 a.m., and never, under any circumstance, speak during Arya's nap, unless it was an emergency. Once, Michael sneezed during nap time, and Brittany closed the door so hard a picture frame fell. She didn't speak to either of us for 3 days. Michael used to say, "We're guests, Jess. Guests have to stay light on their feet." So we tiptoed around her moods, around her silence, around her need to feel in control of every room she entered. Still, I told myself, this is their home. I'm just grateful to be here. And I was, for Michael's sake, for Daniel's too. Even if he rarely looked me in the eye anymore. On Brittany's good days, she let me bake cookies with Arya. On her bad ones, she'd lock herself in the bedroom, headphones in, while Daniel made dinner for three. Daniel used to laugh more. Before the wedding, before the house. Now, his smile came out tired, like a muscle he'd forgotten how to use. But Michael kept me steady. He had a way of making things feel less sharp than they were. When Brittany rolled her eyes at one of my stories, he'd give my hand a soft squeeze under the table. When she sighed too loudly, he'd clear his throat and ask me about my garden. Not because he cared about plants, but because he cared about me. We didn't have much, just our pensions. Daniel said it was fine. He never asked for money. But still, I slipped grocery cash into Brittany's purse each month, quietly, neatly. I didn't want to be accused of freeloading. She never thanked me, but she never brought it up either. I figured that was the best I could hope for. Over time, I started noticing things. Fewer family dinners. Brittany's birthday never included me, though I always baked a cake, just in case. Their anniversary dinner used to be at home, but one year they went out instead. Didn't mention it until the next day. I remember sitting in the living room that night, wearing a nice blouse, waiting for them to come downstairs. I thought we were all going to eat together. Daniel looked startled when he saw me there. He said, "Oh, we didn't think you'd want to come." I smiled, said, "Of course not," then folded my napkin and put the cake back in the fridge. Michael found me upstairs later, sitting at the window. He didn't say anything, just brought me tea, sat beside me, and let the silence do the talking. "Don't take it personally," he whispered eventually. "We're guests in their life, but you're still my home." That one sentence kept me going for years. We had our rituals, Michael and I. He'd make the tea. I'd do the crossword. He'd sweep the back step. I'd water the plants. Little things, quiet things. And then there was Aria, sweet Aria. She didn't see lines between people yet. She'd run into our room barefoot, holding up drawings or asking if Nana could play blocks. I was always Nana, never Jessica to her. She was the only one who hugged me without hesitation. The only one who laughed when I sang old songs or told her stories about Michael and I when we were young and silly and poor. I knitted her a yellow sweater once. Brittany never let her wear it outside, said the color was too loud. But I saw Aria wear it to bed when she thought no one was looking. That was enough for me. As the years passed, Michael slowed down. He moved a little slower, slept a little more. His hand shook when he held his mug, but he never let me carry it for him. I'm not there yet, he'd say with a wink. But I saw it. The fatigue. The way he'd forget words sometimes, or lose his train of thought mid-sentence. He knew, too. He just didn't want to worry me. Brittany noticed. She wasn't unkind about it, but she wasn't soft either. She'd say things like, should he be driving? Or, he's repeating himself again. Never to his face, always to Daniel, and always loud enough for Michael to hear. Daniel would just rub his temple and change the subject. There were times I wanted to scream, to grab Daniel by the shoulders and say, this man raised you. This man gave you everything. Look at him. But I didn't. Because Michael always said, kindness, Jess, even when they don't deserve it. He believed in people longer than most would. That was his strength. And sometimes his burden. We were careful not to leave dishes overnight. Careful not to watch the wrong news channel. Careful to keep the volume low when we laughed. Still, the distance grew. Brittany started sighing louder. Daniel started staying later at work. And we started feeling more like furniture than family. But we held on to each other. One night, just a few months before, Michael looked at me from his chair and said, you think they'll ever miss us? I didn't know how to answer that, so I just reached for his hand, held it tight, and hoped the answer didn't matter. Because even if the world forgot us, he never did. And for me, that had always been enough. Michael died on a Tuesday morning. He had just fed the birds. I watched him from the upstairs window, humming softly as he scattered seeds near the hedge. It was a peaceful little routine of his. He'd always talk to them like old friends. Then he stopped. Just collapsed. No warning, no cry. Just fell, like a tree giving way to rot no one had noticed. By the time I got to him, his eyes were open but vacant. His lips trembled like they wanted to speak, but couldn't form the words. I screamed for help. The neighbors came out first. Brittany didn't. Daniel rushed from his car. He'd been about to leave for work. Brittany, she was inside. I could see her through the kitchen window, arms folded, just watching. She didn't run out. Didn't call anyone. Later, when the ambulance finally pulled away, I found her leaning on the counter, scrolling her phone. She looked up and said, it's probably too late anyway. That sentence, I think I lost a piece of myself right then. At the hospital, they tried. I watched the line on the screen go flat, no drama, no gasping last breath, just a quiet final beep like a small door closing forever. Daniel stood behind me, hands in his pockets, face pale. Brittany didn't speak a word, just stared at the floor. That silence between them, it was loud. He rubbed my back once, half-heartedly, then stepped away when Brittany cleared her throat. When they let me see Michael's body, I sat beside him and straightened the collar of his shirt. His hands were cold, but his face still looked like him. Still gentle. Still mine. I whispered, you were my voice, Michael. What do I do now? But he didn't answer. Of course he didn't answer. Back at home, or what was still technically home, everything was quiet. Daniel called a few relatives. Brittany took over the planning. She was efficient, cold, detached. I asked if we could hold a small gathering at the house. She said no, said it would be disruptive, said they wanted something brief and simple. I nodded. I didn't have the strength to argue. I wanted to read something at the funeral, a short memory, a small poem, something to honor him. But Brittany cut me off. Let's keep it brief. Less is more. That was her motto for everything, I suppose. Even grief. The service lasted 17 minutes. I counted. Back home, everyone went their separate ways. Brittany poured herself a glass of wine. Daniel sat on the stairs, looking lost. Aria was with a neighbor. I went up to our room, mine and Michael's, and sat on the edge of the bed. His shoes were still beside the dresser, his comb still on the nightstand. I picked up his old watch, the one he wore every day for 30 years. It still smelled like him, like worn leather and the faintest hint of cedar. I held it to my chest and let the tears come. The kind that makes your body ache. Not loud, not dramatic, just broken. Then there was a knock at the door. Not a gentle one, just once. Sharp. And then she walked in, didn't wait, didn't ask. Brittany stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her voice like ice. Now that your husband is dead, grieve, pack your bags, and never come back. That's what she said, word for word. No preface, no softness, no shame. I blinked. Thought maybe I'd misheard. But she just stared at me like she was waiting for me to leave a doctor's office or finish a phone call. Like this was an errand she needed to check off. I finally said, "You want me out?" Just like that? She didn't blink. Yes. Daniel and I agreed. You were Michael's responsibility, not ours. Something inside me shattered. 8 years. 8 years of folding towels just the way she liked, of giving her grocery cash in envelopes, of tiptoeing around her silence. 8 years, and she still saw me as a burden that wasn't hers. I looked at her, really looked, and she didn't flinch, didn't soften, just turned on her heel and left the door wide open. Daniel didn't defend me that night or the next morning. When I asked him if this was really what he wanted, he just said, "I don't want to cause tension with Brittany. She's been through a lot too." As if I hadn't just buried my husband. As if I didn't count. So I said nothing more. I didn't scream. I didn't cry in front of them. I didn't beg to stay. I simply packed, slowly, carefully. My hands trembling every time I touched something that used to be ours. I didn't take much, just 2 bags, some clothes, Michael's watch, his old jacket. Aria knocked once while I was folding the last sweater. She held up a crayon drawing, us together in the garden. She whispered, "Where's Nana going?" Before I could answer, Brittany's voice came sharp from the hallway. "Downstairs, Aria. Now." I gave Aria a soft smile. She looked so confused, so small. That was the hardest part. I left that evening. Daniel offered to drive me to a motel, not a relative's place, not a friend's, just a motel. I said no. I had already called my cousin Elaine. She said I could stay with her until I figured things out. Elaine lived in a small 1-bedroom flat, full of books and too much perfume, but it was warm, and she made chai the way I liked. Extra milk, no sugar. I sat on her couch that first night and stared at the wall for hours. No one called. No one checked in, not even Daniel. Weeks passed. The grief stayed heavy, not just for Michael, but for the life I'd been erased from. I didn't know how to explain it to people. How do you say I lost my husband and my son in the same breath? One day, I ran into an old neighbor at the pharmacy. She mentioned, offhand, that Daniel and Brittany had sold the house. Just like that. I hadn't been told, hadn't been asked. Michael and I had helped with the down payment, years ago, $50,000, from our retirement savings. Brittany always called it a gift, said they'd honor us in the house. Now, it was gone. The neighbors said they moved across town, somewhere bigger, with a pool, better schools, more space. More space, but not for me. I wasn't told. I wasn't invited. I didn't matter. I went back to Elaine's that night, took off my shoes, and sat at the window. The city outside felt so loud, so alive. And I felt invisible. Not because I was old, not because I had nothing, but because the people I loved most had quietly decided I was no longer worth keeping. I hadn't opened Michael's box since the day we moved in with Daniel. It had stayed tucked beneath my old sweaters in the back of the closet, wrapped in a shawl he once gave me. I wasn't ready to touch it. Not after the funeral, not after what Brittany said to me in the kitchen. That box felt like it held too much. But one quiet morning, weeks after I'd settled into Elaine's flat, I pulled it out. Elaine had gone out to get groceries. The apartment was still, and I had no one to perform for. No reason to smile, or say I was fine, or pretend I was managing. I sat on the floor with a pillow under my knees and untied the twine around the lid. It smelled faintly like cedar and old paper. Inside were his bank documents, a few greeting cards we'd never sent, folded notes in his familiar handwriting. There was a list of birthdays. Aria's was underlined twice. A tiny envelope labeled Important, Heat Safe. That's where I found the letter. It was folded into thirds. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Daniel's. Younger then, still loopy, still hopeful. The letter was dated over 15 years ago, right after they bought the house. Dad, it began, thank you for the loan. Brittany and I were really stuck, and I don't know what we would have done without your help. $50,000 isn't a small amount, and I promise we'll repay it when we're able. You and Mom are helping us build our future. I'll never forget that. Love, Daniel. Alone. Not a gift. Not something forgotten. Not something we imagined. Alone, in Daniel's own words. I didn't cry, not right away. I just sat with it, held it in both hands like something fragile. My whole body went still. Michael had never mentioned this letter. Maybe he didn't want to make me worry. Maybe he thought Daniel would come around one day. Maybe he just didn't want to believe what was becoming so clear. And I had pushed those thoughts away for years. Told myself Brittany was just tired. Told myself Daniel was just caught in the middle. Told myself we were lucky to live with them. But in that moment, sitting on the carpet in Elaine's flat, I felt it. I had been erased, not just forgotten, erased. Quietly removed from the story of my own family. Pushed aside like clutter, boxed up like something expired. And still, what I felt most wasn't anger. It was grief. A kind of soft, aching grief that spread through my ribs and settled behind my eyes. I hadn't lost Michael once. I was losing him again and again. Every time someone rewrote our lives like we never mattered. That afternoon, I sat out on Elaine's little balcony with the letter in my lap. The sun was low, orange, and soft, warming the tops of the buildings across the street. There was a breeze, just enough to ruffle the paper in my hands. But I didn't fold it. I couldn't. It felt like the only solid thing I'd touched in weeks. Elaine came home with groceries and peeked outside. She didn't ask anything at first. She just brought me a cup of tea, warm and milky, the way Michael always made it. She must have noticed. Some people just know what kindness looks like in small things. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded strange to me. A little girl's voice, far away and trembling. I found something he kept, I said, from Daniel. A letter, from years ago. Elaine pulled a chair beside me, sat without fuss. I didn't look at her. I just kept my eyes on the edge of the page. He thanked us, I said, for the money. Called it a loan. Said they'd repay us. I could feel Elaine watching me, but she didn't say anything. I thought, maybe I imagined it all. Maybe we offered. Maybe we insisted. But no, he knew. Michael made sure he knew. And now, my voice trailed off. And now, she said gently, they pretend you were never part of it. I nodded, swallowed hard. I'm not angry, I whispered. Not really. I just feel invisible. Elaine reached over and put her hand over mine. Just held it. No squeezing, no urgency. Just a quiet, steady weight. A way of saying, I see you. That broke me. The tears came like a wave. Not loud, not wild, just long, slow weeping from somewhere deep inside my ribs. My shoulders trembled, and I pressed the heel of my hand into my chest like I could hold myself together. I hadn't cried like that in years, maybe ever. Elaine didn't move. She sat there with me until the sun dipped behind the buildings and the tea had gone cold between us. When I finally wiped my face, I felt lighter, not healed. But like a window had cracked open in a room that had been locked for too long. Elaine said something that stuck with me ever since. You don't need their permission to exist, Jess. She said it without judgment, like it was just a truth I'd forgotten. You've always been here. You've always mattered. Just because someone chooses to look away doesn't mean you disappeared. After that evening on the balcony, something shifted in me. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't storm off or make declarations. I just began to reclaim the quiet parts of myself that had been waiting. Waiting for someone to notice. Waiting for permission. I started small. Elaine helped me apply for a place in a nearby senior apartment complex. Modest, but well kept. There was a tiny courtyard in the center, And the manager, a woman named Joyce, showed me the unit like she was proud of it. It's not fancy, she said, but it's yours. And that word, yours, it meant something. I moved in with just a few boxes, a couple of sweaters, my worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, Michael's watch, which I'd kept by my bedside since the day he passed. Elaine gave me a little clay pot of marigolds as a housewarming gift. For your doorstep, she said. Something bright to come home to. I planted them carefully, patting the soil around the roots like it was something sacred. Every morning after that, I sat outside with my tea, watching those stubborn little flowers turn toward the sun. It was the first time in years that I wasn't walking on eggshells. No sighs from down the hall. No rules about when to speak or where to stand or whether I was in the way. And slowly I began to fill my life again. There was a woman down the hall named Margie, chatty, always offering too much banana bread. She told me about the local library where she volunteered. They needed someone to read to the children on Wednesdays. They'd love your voice, she said. You've got one of those storybook voices. I laughed, surprised by the compliment. So I went, just once, at first, sat in a little wooden chair with a circle of small faces looking up at me. I read The Velveteen Rabbit, and by the end, one little boy came up and said, "You sound like a grandma from the movies." I don't know why, but that almost made me cry. They asked me back the next week, then the next. I began to feel like a person again, not a burden, not someone waiting in a corner, just me. About a month into my new routine, just as the marigolds began blooming thicker and the library kids started calling me Miss Jessica, I got a call. It was Daniel. I recognized the number immediately. My heart jumped in a way I didn't expect, not out of hope, but caution. I hadn't heard his voice since the day he offered to drop me at that motel. He asked if he could come see me. Said he was alone. I said yes, though my hands were trembling by the time I hung up. He arrived 2 days later holding a small paper bag with pastries and a look on his face I hadn't seen since he was 10. That nervous, soft-eyed guilt when he broke a vase and tried to fix it with glue. I opened the door quietly and said, "Come in." We sat at the small table by the window. He looked around the apartment like it was unfamiliar terrain. And it was really. This was a world that existed without his wife, without his control, without his say. "I like what you've done with it," he said. "It's enough for me," I replied. "I like the quiet." He nodded slowly, took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Mom." The words fell between us, heavier than I expected. I waited. I should have stood up to her. After Dad passed, I should have, I don't know, protected you, at least spoken up. I didn't rush to comfort him. I just looked at him, the boy I raised, the man I barely recognized. "You still could," I said gently. He looked down, ashamed. "She said you were fine, that you had family, that you were moving on." I didn't know about the house. I didn't know she planned to sell so soon. I stood up, went to the drawer by the sofa, and returned with the letter, the one he had written Michael years ago. The one I'd found in the box that changed everything. "I want you to read this." He unfolded it carefully. I watched his eyes scan the page. His face changed. His fingers trembled. "I forgot I even wrote this," he said quietly. "Dad kept this?" I nodded. "Of course he did. He believed in you. In us. And he wanted to make sure things were clear." Daniel stared at the letter for a long time. "I don't want the money back," I said softly. "That's not why I'm showing it to you." He looked up. "I just want you to know what your father did for you, and what I lost." He nodded slowly. Said nothing for a while. "I miss him," he finally said. "I know." He stood to leave not long after. At the door, he paused. "You look stronger," he said. "More like yourself." "I am," I said. "I think I'm starting to remember who that is." He nodded, and then he left. After Daniel left, I didn't wait for a follow-up call. I didn't hope for it either. Something in me had shifted, something steady, something solid. I had spoken the truth. He had seen it. What he chose to do with it was his decision. For once, I wasn't living on the edge of someone else's choices. That week, I returned to the library. The kids were reading Charlotte's Web now, and a little girl with crooked pigtails leaned her head against my arm while I read aloud. I had to stop mid-sentence because something caught in my throat. Not sadness this time, gratitude. A few days later, I baked a small lemon cake and took it down the hall to Margie. We sat on her balcony, legs wrapped in old knit blankets, talking about nothing, about crossword puzzles and the price of eggs, and how Joyce had started dating someone new. It was an ordinary moment, but to me, it was proof that there was life after silence, after exile, after losing the one person who had always seen me, truly seen me, even when I'd been invisible to others. Michael had left me a thread even in death. That letter, it wasn't about money. It was about clarity, about being remembered accurately, about being respected even when I was no longer being protected. And now I was learning to protect myself. I started writing again, just little pieces, thoughts in a journal, memories of Michael, recipes I used to make when Daniel was young, not for anyone else, just for me. To see the words on paper, to feel like my life was still being told. One morning, while sweeping the little patch of tile outside my door, I noticed a new neighbor moving in across the hall. An older man with kind eyes and a box labeled Old Records. We nodded at each other. He said, "Nice flowers," pointing to my marigolds. "They're stubborn," I replied, "like me." He smiled. "That's the best kind." Weeks turned into months. Life began to feel not normal, but mine. I wasn't part of Daniel's world anymore. Not really, but oddly, I didn't feel cut off. I felt free. Elaine came by often. Sometimes we didn't even talk. We'd just sit with tea and our own thoughts. That kind of silence, not cold like Mira's, but warm. Safe. One afternoon, she brought an old photo album she'd rescued from her garage. Inside were pictures from our youth. Me and Michael, young and laughing at a lake, Daniel as a toddler sitting on Michael's shoulders. Moments I'd forgotten. I found one photo where I looked straight into the camera. Not smiling, just real. My hands in the sink, apron dusted with flour. Michael had written a date on the back. Underneath it, in his unmistakable scrawl, were the words, "Jessica, the heart of every room." I pressed that photo to my chest and closed my eyes. It wasn't about the house, or the money, or even the rejection. It was about remembering who I was before I bit myself so small to fit into someone else's idea of what I deserved. In the end, the truth was simple. I was never nothing. I was a woman who raised a son, who loved a husband, who baked cakes and told bedtime stories and folded thousands of shirts with her hands, who survived grief, who planted flowers, who started over. That was enough. One day, months later, I saw a familiar little face walking with a nanny near the park by the library. It was Arya. She looked taller. Her hair was in two bouncing braids, and she held a sketch pad in one hand. I didn't approach. I just watched from a distance. She laughed about something, pointed at a bird. My heart ached, but not in that tearing way anymore, more like a memory stretching its legs, something I could carry without breaking. Maybe one day she'd ask about me. Maybe she wouldn't. Either way, I'd still be here, still planning, still reading, still breathing, still Jessica. I rewrote my will one rainy afternoon, sitting by the window with a mug of chamomile and a worn notepad. It wasn't a dramatic moment, just something that needed doing. There wasn't much to give but what I had. A modest account, a few belongings with meaning. I directed towards something that mattered. I set up a small scholarship fund, nothing grand, but enough to make a dent, for girls who wanted to study caregiving, nursing, hospice work, home health. Because the world will always need women who know how to tend to others, and I wanted them to be seen, supported, and remembered. It felt right, like placing the last stitch in a quilt. I sorted through Michael's books the next day. His shelves had followed me from house to house, like a quiet promise. He'd been a reader until the very end, science, history, poetry. A man who underlined things that moved him, who wrote tiny notes in the margins in blue ink. Sometimes just one word, yes. I donated most of them to the local library where I volunteered, kept only a handful, the ones he'd loved best, and the one where he'd written a full paragraph in the back cover. It was a reflection on aging, scribbled in his slanted handwriting. Growing older isn't about what you lose. It's about what you no longer need to carry. That page alone was worth more to me than any inheritance. Life became simpler after that. Not easier. Grief doesn't really evaporate, but quieter, lighter. I stopped checking my phone for missed calls from Daniel. I stopped marking Arya's birthday on the calendar with hope. These were little forms of letting go. Soft, not sharp. I made peace with the silence. Elaine and I still saw each other weekly. Sometimes she'd bring over soup. Sometimes we'd sit in the courtyard and listen to the breeze shuffle through the trees. It was the kind of friendship that didn't require anything except presence. One spring morning, while walking back from the market with a bag of apples and a newspaper tucked under my arm, I heard a laugh. High and familiar. I turned. It was Arya. She looked taller, older, but the same. She was skipping ahead of a woman I recognized right away, Brittany, my former daughter-in-law, arms crossed, lips pursed, watching from a distance. But Arya saw me first. She ran. No hesitation. Just the innocent momentum of a child who loved without the clutter of adult loyalties. She wrapped her arms around my waist and buried her face in my sweater. Nana, she said, I missed you. I couldn't speak. I just held her. Brittany didn't move. She stood stiff, watching. Her silence was still made of stone, but this time, I didn't absorb it. I simply nodded. A soft, respectful nod, nothing more. I bit down to Arya's eye level. Be kind, I told her, gently brushing a stray hair from her cheek. Always. She nodded like she understood, and then she skipped back toward her mother, still waving. That was enough. It was enough to remind me that love, once given freely, never disappears. It changes shape. It waits in silence. It shows up in unexpected places, like a park on a Tuesday morning. And even if it doesn't come back the way you imagined, it still lives. I walked home with a soft ache in my chest. Not painful, just human. That evening, I made tea and lit a candle by the window. The sun was setting, turning the walls golden. I thought of Michael, of his hands, of the way he'd squeezed my shoulder when I doubted myself, of how he'd always believed in quiet strength. I'm not bitter, I'm not angry. It's strange, but I still believe in love, not just the grand, movie kind, but the kind you build over decades, through burnt toast and folded sweaters and shared looks across a room full of noise. The kind you carry inside, even when no one else sees it. That love still lives in me. I see it in the way I still make tea for two, out of habit. In the way I tuck in my blanket at night. In the way I hum when I water my plants. That's something no one can evict, no one can erase, no one can take. I live now in a quiet apartment with soft lighting and worn furniture. It smells like lavender and old paperbacks. The neighbors wave. Sometimes they forget my name, but they remember my smile, and that's enough. I have made a life here. It's smaller than before, but deeper, like the roots of an old tree, not flashy, but strong. And in that life, there is room for new things, like banana bread cooling on a rack, like Margie's stories from her youth, like the way the library kids run up when they see me coming. They call me Miss Jessica. And I smile because for the first time in a long time, I know who that is. Jessica. Just Jessica. Whole, steady, home.